Meet with friendly neighborhood dictator, Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. If you've ever wanted to watch a power-hungry HOA president discover that intimidation is a two-way street, smash that like button. And drop a comment if you've ever met someone who thought a clipboard was a weapon of mass destruction. So there I was, Tuesday afternoon, minding my own business and watering my perfectly regulation-compliant lawn when Hurricane Karen decided to make landfall on my property. And by Hurricane Karen, I mean Janet Wickshire, our HOA president, who somehow managed to turn a voluntary neighborhood organization into her personal fiefdom. Picture this. A woman in her late 50s who dressed like she was perpetually heading to a board meeting at Satan's Country Club. Today's ensemble? A beige pantsuit that screamed, "I'd like to speak to democracy's manager," and reading glasses hanging from a chain that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She had that particular walk that suggested she believed the sidewalk should feel honored by her presence. "Excuse me," she said, approaching with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, and the smile of a shark who'd just discovered a swimming pool full of tourists. "We need to discuss your situation." My situation? I glanced around my front yard, which looked like every other front yard on the block, except mine had the audacity to exist while I lived in it. "Which situation would that be, Janet? The one where I pay my dues on time, or the one where I exist without your written permission?" She clutched her tablet, because of course she had a tablet specifically for HOA business, like it contained the nuclear launch codes. "Your recent property modifications violate several community guidelines." I set down my hose, already feeling that familiar tingle you get when someone's about to try selling you oceanfront property in Kansas. "What modifications?" "The unauthorized installation of security cameras." She pointed at my doorbell camera with the same expression most people reserve for discovering a dead rat in their cereal. Now here's where it gets fun. See, I'd installed that doorbell camera exactly 3 months ago, following the proper HOA notification process, complete with the required 30-day advance notice and architectural review submission. I even included photos, specifications, and a hand-drawn diagram that my 5-year-old nephew could have understood. The approval had been granted in writing, signed by Janet herself. But apparently, Janet's memory worked like a goldfish's, conveniently short when it suited her purposes. "Janet," I said, adopting the patient tone typically reserved for explaining why we don't eat glue to kindergartners. "You approved that camera installation personally. I have the paperwork." Her eye twitched. Just a little, but enough to tell me she remembered exactly what she'd signed. That approval was conditional. Conditional on what? Proper implementation. I waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. Instead, she stood there looking like someone had asked her to explain quantum physics using interpretive dance. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. A neighbor walking his dog slowed down, sensing drama in the air with the instinctive wisdom of someone who'd lived through previous Janet encounters. Even the dog seemed interested, tilting its head as if trying to understand why humans made everything so unnecessarily complicated. "Let me get this straight," I said finally. "You're here to complain about a camera that you approved, installed according to specifications you reviewed, because it's somehow not properly implemented?" The angle is invasive. It faces my front door. It could potentially capture images of the street. That's exactly what security cameras do, Janet. They capture images of things. Kind of the whole point. She shifted her weight, and I caught a glimpse of what was really bothering her. The camera had a perfect view of the street, including the spot where she liked to park her white Lexus, usually in front of fire hydrants or in spaces clearly marked for guest parking, while she conducted her daily rounds of finding new things to be offended by. "Nevertheless," she said, drawing herself up to her full height of about 5'4" in heels, "the camera needs to be repositioned or removed within 48 hours, or the HOA will be forced to take action." And there it was, the threat, delivered with all the subtlety of a brick through a window and about as much legal backing as a chocolate teapot. I smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile, more like the expression a cat makes when it spots a mouse that thinks it's hidden. What kind of action? Legal action. Fines. Potential foreclosure proceedings. The words hung in the air like a fart in an elevator. Even she seemed to realize she'd overplayed her hand. But Janet had never met a hole she couldn't dig deeper. Over a legally installed, properly approved security camera. Yes, that you signed off on. The approval is being reconsidered. By who? The board. You mean you? Another eye twitch. I am the democratically elected representative of this community's interests. I'd like to pause here and mention that Janet had run unopposed in the last 3 HOA elections, primarily because she'd scheduled the voting meetings for 6 a.m. on weekdays and somehow forgotten to mention them to anyone who might disagree with her. Democratic? Sure, in the same way that a fox guarding a henhouse is providing security services. Well, Janet, I said, turning off my hose and coiling it with deliberate slowness. I appreciate you stopping by to threaten me on my own property. Really adds that special neighborhood charm you can't get from normal human interaction. Her face went through several interesting color changes, settling on a shade of red that suggested her blood pressure medication might need adjustment. This isn't a threat, it's a formal notice. Of course it is. And I'm sure you'll be filing all the proper paperwork to document this formal notice. Naturally. Great. I'll be looking forward to reading it. I headed toward my front door, then paused. Oh, and Janet, next time you want to have a formal discussion about HOA business, you might want to schedule it through proper channels instead of ambushing people in their yards. Just a thought. I was almost to my door when she delivered her parting shot. You'll be hearing from us soon. Something about the way she said it made my neck prickle. This wasn't over. In fact, I had the distinct feeling it was just getting started. 2 days later, I discovered that Janet hadn't been making idle threats. She'd been making plans. Stupid plans, but plans nonetheless. I was working from home, one of the perks of being a freelance cybersecurity consultant, when my doorbell camera chimed. I glanced at my phone expecting to see a delivery driver or maybe a neighbor's cat conducting its daily territorial patrol. Instead, I saw 2 men in dark uniforms standing on my porch, looking about as comfortable as vegetarians at a barbecue convention. They wore badges that gleamed in the morning sun and carried themselves with the kind of authority that comes from watching too many police procedurals on TV. Here's the thing about working in cybersecurity. You develop a healthy paranoia about everything, including people who show up at your door claiming to be something they might not be. So instead of immediately opening the door, I did what any reasonable person would do. I zoomed in on their badges and started taking screenshots. Sir, one of them called out, knocking on my door with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. We need to speak with you about a complaint filed against you. I opened the door, but left the security chain engaged, creating just enough gap to see them clearly while maintaining what security professionals call tactical positioning, which is a fancy way of saying ready to slam the door and call real cops if necessary. Good morning, officers, I said, deliberately using the word officers to see how they'd react. What can I help you with? The taller one, let's call him fake badge number 1, shifted uncomfortably. We're here about violations of community standards. Someone filed a complaint about unauthorized surveillance equipment. Unauthorized according to who? The local authorities. He consulted a clipboard with the same confidence most people use when trying to remember if they turned off the stove. Now, I've dealt with actual police officers before. They don't consult clipboards when telling you why they're at your door, and they sure as hell don't stutter when explaining their authority. These guys had about as much law enforcement credibility as a mall security guard who'd ordered his badge from Amazon. Can I see your identification, please? Fake badge number 2 stepped forward, clearly the designated smooth talker of this duo. Sir, we're just here to resolve a community dispute. If you could just remove the camera equipment, we can all move on with our day. That's interesting, I said, taking my phone out and making sure they could see I was recording. Because last I checked, actual police officers are required to provide identification when requested, and they don't negotiate code violations on doorsteps. The color drained from both their faces faster than water down a broken sink. Fake badge number 1 started backing toward the street, while fake badge number 2 tried to maintain his authority figure pose, though he looked about as intimidating as a wet paper towel. Sir, You need to comply with the— Let me stop you right there, I interrupted. Before you dig this hole any deeper, why don't you tell me who's really paying you? Silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than actual screaming. Or better yet, I continued, let me guess. Janet Wickshire hired you to come intimidate me into removing my camera so she can continue parking illegally and harassing neighbors without being recorded. Fake badge number 2's poker face crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. We're just doing our job. Your job is impersonating police officers? We never said we were police. Fake badge number 1 called from the sidewalk, apparently deciding that retreat was the better part of valor. I laughed. Not a nice laugh, more like the sound a hyena makes when it spots wounded prey. No, you just showed up in uniforms with badges, talking about authority and compliance. Totally different thing. They exchanged a look that could best be described as, we're fucked, aren't we? Here's what's going to happen, I said, still recording. You're going to leave my property. You're going to go back to whoever hired you and tell them that if they want to discuss HOA business, they can follow proper procedures. And if I see you anywhere near my house again without a warrant signed by an actual judge, I'm calling the real police. But, no buts. Unless you want to explain to actual law enforcement why you're running around the neighborhood playing dress-up and harassing residents. They left. Fast. Fake badge number 1 was practically jogging by the time they reached their car. A beat-up sedan with no official markings that screamed, definitely not a police vehicle. I watched them drive away, then immediately called my neighbor Steve, who happened to be a retired police sergeant with a sense of humor darker than a black hole and about as much patience for nonsense. Steve, you busy? Just wondering when someone was going to call about the fake cops in the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson saw them from her kitchen window and nearly called 911. They were at my house. Of course they were. Janet's been making noise about you all week. Apparently, you're single-handedly destroying property values by having the audacity to install a security camera. That she approved. Logic was never her strong suit. What do you need? Information. And maybe some advice on how to handle someone who thinks hiring fake cops is a reasonable escalation. Steve's laugh sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. Boy, you just made my retirement a whole lot more interesting. Come over for beer later. We need to talk. As I hung up, I realized Janet had just made a critical error in judgment. She'd gone from being a petty neighborhood nuisance to someone actively breaking laws. And unlike her, I actually understood the difference between authority and the illusion of authority. But I had a feeling she wasn't done yet. People like Janet don't usually learn from their mistakes. They just make bigger ones. Steve's advice had been simple. Document everything, stay legal, and let her dig her own grave. People like Janet always do. Smart man, my neighbor Steve. Too bad Janet didn't get the memo about self-preservation. Friday afternoon, I was reviewing security footage from the week, partly for my own amusement, partly because I'd started treating Janet's antics like a nature documentary about entitled suburban wildlife, when my phone buzzed with a text from my next-door neighbor, Maria. Check your front camera. Entertainment incoming. I switched to the live feed just in time to see Janet's white Lexus pull up, followed by what can only be described as a clown car full of middle-aged suburban authority figures. Out stepped Janet. Obviously, plus 3 people I didn't recognize wearing matching polo shirts with some kind of official-looking logo. The cavalry has arrived, I muttered, grabbing my phone and settling in to watch what promised to be either the most pathetic intimidation attempt in HOA history or the setup for a really good lawsuit. Janet led her little parade up my walkway like a general leading troops in a battle. If generals wore sensible flats and carried canvas totes full of laminated documents. The polo shirt brigade followed behind, looking like they'd rather be getting root canals. The doorbell rang with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. I let it ring twice before opening the door, making sure my phone was recording. Good afternoon, Janet. I see you brought friends. This is an official HOA enforcement visit, she announced, gesturing to her backup crew like she was introducing the cast of a Broadway show. We're here regarding multiple violations of community standards. Multiple violations? She consulted her tablet with the solemnity of a judge reading a death sentence. Unauthorized surveillance equipment, failure to comply with architectural standards, and she paused dramatically. Intimidation of HOA officials. I blinked. I intimidated you. Your refusal to cooperate with reasonable requests constitutes harassment. The logic was so twisted it could have been used as a pretzel. So let me understand this. You demanding I remove legally installed equipment is reasonable, but me saying no is harassment. Exactly. One of the polo shirts, a nervous-looking guy with a clipboard and the general demeanor of someone who'd lost a bet, stepped forward. Sir, we're with Suburban Standards Enforcement. We've been contracted to resolve this dispute. Suburban Standards Enforcement? I couldn't keep the amusement out of my voice. That's really what you went with. It's a legitimate compliance organization, Janet snapped. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. Funny thing about Suburban Standards Enforcement, they were incorporated exactly 6 days ago. Guess who the registered agent is? Silence. The kind that makes you wonder if everyone suddenly forgot how to breathe. Janet Wickshire? I continued. Filed under emergency incorporation with the state, listing services as neighborhood compliance consulting. You literally created a fake company to intimidate me. The polo shirts exchanged looks that suggested they hadn't been informed about the creative aspects of their new employment. One of them, a woman who looked like she taught elementary school and was rapidly regretting her career choices, took a step back. This is ridiculous, Janet sputtered. You're being paranoid. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you hired actors to play fake cops on Tuesday, and when that didn't work, you created a fictional enforcement agency to harass me on Friday. I'm starting to see a pattern. Janet's face went through its familiar color-changing routine. Those weren't actors. Right, they were independent contractors specializing in authority figure cosplay. Much more professional. The nervous guy with the clipboard cleared his throat. Ma'am, you said this was a standard HOA compliance visit. It is, Janet insisted, though her voice had that slightly hysterical edge people get when their carefully constructed lies start unraveling in public. Then why did you create a fake company? The elementary school teacher asked, her voice getting that dangerous quiet tone that kindergartners worldwide have learned to fear. It's not fake. It's specialized. Specialized in what? I asked. Because according to your incorporation documents, your company has no employees, no business license, and no authority to enforce anything anywhere. The polo shirt brigade was now openly staring at Janet like she'd grown a second head. The nervous guy was backing toward his car. The elementary school teacher looked like she was calculating whether she could make it to her vehicle before the whole situation exploded into a YouTube-worthy meltdown. Furthermore, I continued, because when you're on a roll, you keep rolling. Impersonating enforcement officials is illegal. Creating fictitious companies to harass neighbors is illegal. And conspiracy to commit intimidation? Also illegal. You can't prove anything, Janet said, though she sounded about as confident as someone trying to convince themselves that the check really is in the mail. I held up my phone. Actually, I can. See, this conversation is being recorded. And so was Tuesday's conversation. And the fake cop visit. And pretty much everything else. Thanks to that camera you're so upset about. The last polo shirt made a break for it, jogging toward the street with the determination of someone who'd suddenly remembered they had somewhere very important to be. The elementary school teacher followed, leaving only Janet and the nervous guy, who was clutching his clipboard like a security blanket. This isn't over, Janet said, which is what people always say when they've run out of actual arguments. You're right, I agreed. It's not. Because now we get to the fun part, where I file complaints with the actual authorities about your fake authorities. She turned to leave, then spun back around with the expression of someone who'd just remembered they had one more card to play. The HOA board will be voting on your continued residency next week. That should be interesting, considering the HOA board consists of you, Mrs. Patterson, who moved to Florida 6 months ago, and Mr. Jenkins, who's been dead for 2 years. Her eye twitched. We have new board members. Really? When were they elected? They were appointed. By who? The existing board. You mean you? Another twitch. At this rate, she was going to need medical attention. The vote is Tuesday at 7 p.m., she said, apparently deciding to quit while she was only catastrophically behind. I'll be there, I called after her as she stalked back to her car, the nervous guy trailing behind like a lost puppy. Wouldn't miss it for the world. As they drove away, I realized Janet had just handed me the perfect opportunity to end this nonsense once and for all. She wanted to escalate? Fine. But she was about to discover that some people are much better at escalation than others. Tuesday evening arrived with all the anticipation of a heavyweight boxing match. If heavyweight boxing matches were held in community center conference rooms and featured middle-aged suburbanites wielding parliamentary procedure like medieval weapons. I arrived 2 minutes early, because punctuality is important when you're about to watch someone's elaborate fantasy crash into the brick wall of actual law. The meeting was being held in the Pine Ridge Community Center, a beige building that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought excitement was a four-letter word. Janet was already there, of course, seated at the head of a folding table with her tablet, a stack of papers, and the kind of confident smile you see on people who are absolutely certain they're about to win big at poker, right before they discover everyone else has been counting cards. She wasn't alone. 3 other people sat at the table, all looking like they'd rather be having root canals performed by caffeinated squirrels. I recognized one of them as Bob Hendricks from Maple Street, a guy who'd once spent 40 minutes explaining to me why his lawn was superior to everyone else's lawn. The other 2 were strangers, but they had that particular deer-in-headlights expression that suggested they'd volunteered for something without reading the fine print. "Good evening," Janet said as I entered, her voice carrying the false warmth of a used car salesman who's about to explain why the rust adds character. "I'm glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, taking a seat in the small audience area. "Should be educational." About a dozen other neighbors had shown up, including Steve, Maria, and Mrs. Henderson from 2 streets over. Word had apparently gotten around that Janet was putting on some kind of show, and suburban entertainment options being what they are, this was probably the most exciting thing to happen since the incident with the runaway lawnmower last spring. Janet called the meeting to order with all the ceremony of someone launching a battleship. The Pine Ridge HOA board will now address the matter of compliance violations at 42 Elm Street. "Point of order," I said, raising my hand. Her smile flickered. "This isn't a town hall. You'll have time to speak when." Actually, according to state HOA regulations and your own bylaws, any homeowner has the right to question board procedures before official business begins. Steve coughed to cover what sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Janet's eye did its familiar twitch. "What's your question? Could you introduce the board members and explain when they were elected or appointed?" "Of course." She gestured to Bob. "Bob Hendricks, elected last." "When?" I interrupted. "What date? What meeting? How many homeowners voted?" Bob shifted in his seat like he was sitting on fire ants. "Well, it was," Janet said. "I mean, the community needed representation. So you weren't elected." "Not exactly, but were you appointed through proper procedures as outlined in the HOA bylaws?" More uncomfortable shifting. Janet asked if I wanted to help. I turned to the other 2 strangers. "And you are?" The woman, who looked like she taught middle school and was rapidly regretting every life choice that had led to this moment, spoke up. "I'm Sandra Mills. I just moved here last month, and Mrs. Wickshire said the community needed volunteers. So you're not elected, not properly appointed, and you've lived here for 30 days. "I'm trying to be involved," she protested. "That's admirable. But it doesn't give you authority to vote on HOA matters." Janet's face was cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. "This is all perfectly legitimate." "Is it?" I stood up, pulling out my phone. "Because I spent some time researching HOA law this week. Fascinating stuff, really. Did you know that HOA boards must be elected by homeowners, with proper notice and voting procedures? And that any official actions taken by illegitimate boards can result in personal liability for the participants?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Bob was staring at Janet like she'd just told him she was secretly a space alien. Sandra looked like she was calculating the fastest route to her car. "Furthermore," I continued, Creating fake enforcement companies, hiring people to impersonate officials, and harassment of homeowners are all criminal matters, not HOA business. Now see here. Janet started, but I wasn't done. Oh, I'm just getting started. See, I had an interesting conversation with the county attorney's office yesterday. Turns out they're very interested in people who create fictional companies to intimidate neighbors. They're also curious about the fake police incident. The silence in the room was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Steve was grinning like Christmas had come early. Maria had her phone out, clearly recording. Mrs. Henderson was taking notes with the dedication of a court stenographer. But here's the really fascinating part, I said, pulling up my phone's note app. I also contacted the state HOA regulatory board. They informed me that Pine Ridge has been operating without proper oversight for 3 years, ever since the last legitimate board members moved away, or, what was it, died. Bob jumped up so fast his chair fell over. I didn't know any of this was illegal. Janet said it was just neighborhood business. Sandra was already grabbing her purse. I'm sorry, I can't be part of this. I thought I was volunteering for community service, not whatever this is. The third guy, who hadn't said a word the entire time, stood up and walked out without so much as a goodbye. Janet watched her carefully assembled board disintegrate like a sandcastle at high tide. You're all overreacting. This is just a misunderstanding. Is it? I asked. Because the way I see it, you've been running a fake HOA with fake authority, making fake rules, hiring fake cops, and creating fake companies. At what point does this stop being a misunderstanding and start being a criminal enterprise? That's when Steve decided to join the fun. Ma'am, he said, using his cop voice, you might want to consider consulting with a lawyer before this goes any further. You can't intimidate me. Janet snapped, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that she was now standing alone at a folding table in a room full of people who were staring at her like she'd grown tentacles. I'm not trying to intimidate you, I said calmly. I'm just pointing out that you've managed to violate about 6 different laws in your quest to make me move my camera 3 inches to the left. The last of the neighbors started filing out, talking quietly among themselves. Mrs. Henderson paused at the door and called back. Janet, dear, you might want to think about this before it gets worse. Soon it was just me, Steve, Janet, and the overwhelming smell of her defeat hanging in the air like burnt coffee. This isn't over, she said, which was becoming her catchphrase. Actually, I said, I think it is. Because tomorrow morning, I'm filing complaints with the police about the fake cop incident, the state attorney about your fake company, and the HOA regulatory board about your fake authority. Oh, and I'm also filing a civil lawsuit for harassment. For the first time since I'd met her, Janet Wickshire was completely speechless. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying my morning coffee and watching Janet's for sale sign get installed in her front yard. The irony was delicious. Almost as delicious as the coffee I was drinking from my new mug, which read, World's Most Compliant HOA Member, a gift from Steve. The whole neighborhood transformation had been remarkable to watch. Without Janet's constant reign of terror, people were actually talking to each other again. Kids were playing in the street without fear of citation. Someone had even organized a block party for next weekend. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Settlement offer accepted. Check will arrive Friday. Ah yes, the settlement. Funny how quickly Janet's tune had changed when actual law enforcement showed up at her door with actual warrants about her fake law enforcement activities. Turns out, impersonating officials is taken quite seriously by people who actually are officials. The criminal charges had been educational for everyone involved. Janet learned that I was just trying to maintain community standards isn't a valid defense for fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy. Her fake company learned that incorporating a business doesn't magically grant you police powers. And the guys she'd hired to play cops learned that we never actually said we were police doesn't hold much water when you show up in uniforms with badges. But the civil settlement had been my favorite part. Janet had been so eager to avoid having her activities discussed in open court that she'd agreed to pay for all my legal fees, plus damages for harassment, plus the cost of upgrading my entire home security system. The new cameras I'd installed with her money had night vision, motion tracking, and enough storage capacity to document any future neighborhood shenanigans for posterity. Steve wandered over with his own coffee, settling into the chair I'd bought specifically for these front porch debriefing sessions. Moving truck should be here tomorrow, he said, nodding toward Janet's house. Where's she going? Heard she bought a place in one of those gated communities down south. The kind where they actually do have private security and rules about everything from mailbox height to grass length. Perfect for her. Yep. She'll either love it or try to overthrow their board within 6 months. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood function like a normal place where normal people lived normal lives. It was a novel concept. You know what the best part is? I said finally. What's that? She never did get me to move that camera. Steve laughed. Speaking of which, the new HOA board wants to officially thank you for documenting everything. Makes their job a lot easier. The new HOA board was a refreshing change. 5 neighbors who actually lived in the neighborhood had been properly elected and understood the difference between maintaining community standards and running a fascist microstate. They'd spent their first meeting rescinding about 30 of Janet's more ridiculous rules and apologizing to everyone she'd harassed over the years. They also wanted to know if you'd consider running for president next year. I nearly choked on my coffee. Me? Run the HOA? Why not? You've already proven you can handle petty tyrants and fake authority figures. Plus, you understand the legal side of things. I'll think about it. As if summoned by the conversation, my phone rang. The caller ID made me grin. This should be good, I told Steve, answering the call on speaker. Hello, Janet. You think you've won, don't you? Her voice had that particular edge that comes from spending 3 weeks discovering that actions have consequences. I don't think I've won, Janet. I know I've won. The settlement check arriving Friday kind of sealed the deal. This is all your fault. Really? Because I'm pretty sure you're the one who hired fake cops, created a fake company, and tried to run a fake HOA board. I just had the audacity to own a camera and know how to use Google. Steve was trying not to laugh out loud, which made him look like he was having some kind of medical emergency. You've ruined everything. Janet continued. I was trying to maintain property values and community standards. By breaking multiple laws and harassing your neighbors? By keeping people like you in line. And there it was. The core of Janet's worldview, laid bare in all its entitled glory. She genuinely believed that her personal opinions about how other people should live their lives trumped their actual rights, community bylaws, and state law. Well, I said, I hope your new neighbors appreciate your unique approach to community building. They will. They understand the importance of proper standards. I'm sure they do. Good luck with that. I hung up and looked at Steve, who was shaking his head in amazement. Some people never learn, he said. No, they don't. But that's what makes life interesting. We finished our coffee in peace, watching the neighborhood go about its business without fear of arbitrary citations or surprise visits from fake authorities. It was, I reflected, exactly what suburban life should be, boring, predictable, and blissfully free of power-mad HOA presidents with delusions of grandeur. My doorbell camera chimed with a delivery notification. I checked my phone and saw the mail carrier dropping off a package. Nothing dramatic, nothing requiring documentation or legal action. Just a normal delivery to a normal house in a normal neighborhood. It was perfect. Later that afternoon, I sent a group text to all my neighbors. Block party planning meeting tonight at 7 p.m. Bring snacks and ideas. No clipboards, badges, or authority complexes required. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with enthusiastic responses. Turns out, when you remove the threat of arbitrary enforcement and fake police visits, people actually enjoy living in their own neighborhood. Who would have thought? The best part? My security camera captured it all. Every smile, every laugh, every moment of people simply enjoying being neighbors instead of constantly looking over their shoulders for the next ridiculous citation. And if Janet ever decided to drive by and see what she was missing, well, she'd be on camera too. Because some things are worth documenting, even when they're perfectly, wonderfully, completely normal. One fake HOA president defeated, one neighborhood liberated, one settlement collected, and one very satisfied homeowner with a perfectly positioned security camera that she never, ever had to move. Drop a comment if you've ever had to deal with a power-mad HOA president. And hit that like button if you think karma sometimes needs a little help from security cameras and actual law enforcement.